like to welcome you all to the Mineral King Room and to the Three Rivers Historical Museum. I am honored to open this program, this auspicious event. It is just tremendous that the Mineral King Preservation Society and the Three Rivers Historical Society is working together on so many projects. And this has just been a tremendous opportunity to see the progression with this project. At this point, I would like to welcome Lisa Montero.
Thank you, Nancy. Yes. Good morning, everyone. I talk really loud, so I don't know if we need that. That might be offensive. Yeah, I'm Lisa Montero. I am the director of the Mineral King Preservation Society. A wonderful job. We have the pleasure of preserving and protecting and sharing information about, in my opinion, one of the most beautiful places in the world. So grateful to be working with the Three Rivers Museum, and you're going to hear a long list of people that we need to thank when we move outside, and I get to speak a bit longer, but I don't want to cut into Laile's time. I just really want to thank a few of you that came here. We have our superintendent from the park, Clay Jordan, little wave, Eddie Valero here, MKPS board member Mark Mertz in the back, Louise Jackson in the very, very back, and then there's, of course, members of the Three Rivers board. We have Gino, get a little wave. Tom is working, and Nancy, of course, who just spoke. So I'm going to turn it over to Laile. Thank you again so much for coming. If you're not a member of either organization, I highly, highly encourage you to join. It makes events like this possible. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to turn off the lights. You ready? Okay. Going to take just a second. We're just doing a tech check.
There you go.
Okay, so I'm Laile, and I think I know pretty much every one of you. Thank you so much for coming out. I am incredibly excited. And I'm just excited to be able to share the opening of this exhibit with you. As some of you know, it's been something I've just dedicated way too many hours to. So can you guys hear me? Do I need to hold this closer to my mouth? Is this good? Okay, perfect. So, as many of you know who have come to my presentations before, I love questions. You're absolutely free to interrupt me at any point. It works well that way. And then we're going to have Q&A at the end too. So, should we get started? Yeah. Okay. So as the title of the presentation indicates, our exhibit is focused on mystery. It's a 150-year-old mystery. We decided to focus it on mystery because most mysteries are cool, even at 10 a.m., right? And anything that rhymes with history is cool, right? But history is mystery. History is the process of seeking out clues, of following those clues and piecing them together until we have some semblance of a coherent narrative. It's a narrative that's about ourselves and where we came from. It's usually a narrative that we feel comfortable telling our children. It's often a narrative that supports how we want other people to receive ourselves, right? As we talk about the New England Tunnel and Smelting Company, we're talking about a narrative that's been around for, well, since it was created 150 years ago, right? And these narratives that we create for ourselves, they survive. They survive until we change. They survive until our perception of ourselves changes. And they survive until new clues show up, or someone seeks them out, that shows us that we got the story, or at least some parts of the story, wrong all along. So, in about an hour, or maybe less, I'm going to release you outside, and you're going to be able to ponder what Mark Twain said here. A mind is a hole in the ground with a lighter on top. And what Orlando Barton said, you're going to get to know Orlando Barton pretty well in this presentation. So you're going to get to decide who's right. So, hang on just a sec. I'm very excited. So it's about the New England Tunnel and Smelting Company. This company was formed in 1875 to fund the mining of ores in Mineral King, as well as the extraction of precious metals from those ores. It failed in 1878, and by then it was already known as the New England Thieving and Swindling Company. But was that fair? Did it really deserve to be called the New England Thieving and Swindling Company? So in a little while, you're going to be able to find out. The New England Tunnel Smelting Company, as I said, it failed in its endeavor, perhaps because it was run by swindlers and deceivers, but perhaps its leaders were deceived themselves by Milton's ore, by the smelting technology they used, or by the man who operated the smelter. So you're going to go out there and you're going to see some clues and you're going to be able to find out for yourself. We couldn't fit all of the stories and clues into the exhibit. Even the biggest exhibits have space constraints. So we had to leave some of the story and the clues out. And one of the things that I like to do when I go through any museum, any historical museum, is try to think what was left out and why. Well, today I get to tell you some of the stories and some of the clues that we left out, which makes you really lucky because it means you're going to have an advantage over everybody else who goes through that exhibit. So, let's move on to the next one. So, the New England Tunnel and Smelting Company. Would you name a company? The New England Tunnel and Smelting Company? Especially if it had nothing whatsoever to do with New England. So, it's quite a mouthful. And there's this word smelting in here. Would any of you like to volunteer to tell what a smelter is? We had somebody who was here Thursday. Am I putting you on the spot? You don't have to. Anybody here know what a smelter is? What smelting is? Yeah, go ahead.
Melting like iron and ores and stuff? Like melting iron and ores?
Yeah, exactly. So smelting is the process of heating a furnace to over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit in order to melt ore to be able to separate out the precious metals from it. Right? So 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And in the process, all sorts of nasty things escape. We get toxic sulfur dioxide gases that come out through the smokestack. And of course, we get lead dust that comes out of the smokestack. So what do you think it would be like to operate a smelter based off of that? You guys think you want to be smelter operators?
So like Pittsburgh would be Mineral King?
Yeah, pretty much. Maybe on a smaller scale, right? Maybe Pittsburgh when it was just getting started up. So just imagine it. What would it be like? Any thoughts?
Deadly.
Deadly, yeah, definitely deadly. You're consuming the lead and the toxic gases, yeah.
It would require some massive PPE and hazard pay.
Was I missed that?
Pardon?
Oh,
It would require some massive PPE and hazard pay.
Ideally, right? But in 1876, they might not have had PPE. And in fact, the New England Tunnel and Smelting Company was well known for not paying its employees at all. Well, let's peek inside the smelter house. If it was 1876, you guys would be looking in at the smelter man and Orlando Barton, who we met a few slides earlier. On a very cold December day, we'd see the two of them starting up a fire at the base of the smelter. When it got hot enough, they would plug it up with fire bricks. And then our smelter man would go up to the feeding floor where he would get ready to start shoveling ore into the smelter. But meanwhile, down below, Orlando Barton kind of snuck to the side and he started up a blower. The blower was run by a water turbine that was fed with water from the East Fork of the Coweta River. And he would use that to blow, here we go. Oops.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. Back up. Thank you. This is my sister. Thank you. So he would use it to blow air into these holes that are called tuyers in French, but the miners call them tweeters because that's easier, right? So he would blow the air into it with this blower, and that of course would make the flame, the fire hotter, right? And get it up to those 2,000 degrees. So meanwhile, then we've got our smelter man. Yeah, let's go back up. So now we're heating up that fire, right? We need it really hot. And then our smelter man is up on the feeding room floor. And he takes 2 shovelfuls of charcoals there behind him, and he pours it into the smelter. There's a hole there at the top. So he pours them into the smelter. Then he takes a shovelful of our ore, which has been crushed down to about pea-sized little chunks. Then he takes a shovelful of lime, which came from the tufa formations in Mineral King. Have you all seen those tufa formations? Yeah, we've seen some naughty pits. So that would have been crushed up, and so we would put a shovelful of that in. And then finally, a half shovelful of iron oxide, which is a fancy word for rust. And it came from one of Mineral King's iron springs. So a lot of local sourcing, right? Suddenly, Charles Baker, their boss, came into the building and he shut off the blower. Can you imagine what that would do to all of the melting material in the furnace?
It would stop it.
Huh?
The fire would get less hot, so it would cool down. It would
Yeah.
solidify.
Yeah, so it starts solidifying, right? And so, of course, the smelter man ordered Orlando to turn it back on. So Orlando went and he turned it back on, which caused our baker, the boss, to fall into a rage. They had an argument, he and the smelter man, and the smelter man just quit. He just walked out. And so Baker, the boss, smiled. He was just calm. He smiled. He went on up to the feeder room floor again, and he started picking up these chunks of ore that were as big as his head and stuffing them into the smelter. And so that exacerbated the effect of having shut off the blower earlier. And so all of that molten material started cooling down and solidifying, which is called freezing, even though it didn't get freezing, right? But the furnace froze, the smelter froze, and that solid mass was something that Orlando was going to have to clean up. So our boss man, Charles Baker, told Orlando to get that smelter back into working condition. And he said he was going to head back up to San Francisco, and he was going to find a smelter man who actually knew what he was doing. So Orlando figured that Baker was actually sabotaging the smelting effort. He wanted to delay the success of the smelter in order to acquire more shares of stock in the company. This is what Orlando thought. But could something else have been going on? What do you think? Any other possibilities? I had to figure that there might be other possibilities, right? Because this is just the word of Orlando.
Well, what if the ore wasn't all bad and you wanted to be known?
Look what he was.
What-
Oh, he was bad. I think he was a swindler, right?
Well, what if the ore was just like, you knew it wasn't anything, why would you want to have it go through the process?
You would, yeah, because that would be proof that it was nothing, right? So that's good. So a good first question is, was the ore actually valuable, right? And then, of course, Charles Baker was saying that the smelter man wasn't qualified. So another question I had was who was this smelter man, and was he qualified? And then finally, we're looking at the technology, right? Was the technology right for the job? Could it have turned Mineral King's ores into gleaming metal? So, before, any guys have any more questions that you would add? Did I catch them all?
Who's that guy?
Who knows who that guy is? This is Ranger Josh. He showed up in 2015, and he modeled the smelter for me, this piece of the smelter. The piece of the smelter there is our superstar today. This is the artifact that we spent a week preserving. He's there making it look even better, right? so this, of course, is a part of, no, Josh is a part of our evidence. But this component, this water jacket component of the smelter, is a part of our evidence. Another piece of evidence that I had was the ore itself, right? We have to take a look at the ore to see if it was valuable. Does everybody here know what ore is? Yeah, anybody not? So all it is rock that contains something that has economic value. It doesn't have to be, you know, silver or gold or anything like that, but in this case, it's silver. This is actually this is a picture of some of the ore at the mineral king, and we have a little bit of silver in that. So another place that I could look, of course, is on the ground. As an archaeologist, I surveyed the New England Tunnel and Smelting Company site, and this is just a portion of it because I don't want you guys to recognize it. So looked at the site as itself to see what kind of clues it would offer. The clues it offered was actually confirmation of the material that they used to put into the smelter. So Orlando was accurate on that. And then the final one then is the historical documentation. As a historical archaeologist, I spend at least half my time going through historical research and not actually working on the ground. So there's our evidence. But before we get into the evidence and look for clues, let's orient ourselves. So, Mineral King, right? Have any of you never been to Mineral King? Yeah? Okay, we've got some. Okay, everybody else, should they go? Yes. All right, so the place we're talking about is Tapa Ishi. Have any of you ever heard of that name before? That's the name that Mineral King had for hundreds and possibly thousands of years. That's the name that was used by the Chummi, which is the local tribe of Native Americans. When the mining rush started in Mineral King in 1873, it had a different name though. It was called Lovelace Valley. It was also called Corral Valley, and that's because the Lovelace family was summering their livestock in the valley. This is a picture of where they had their gate to stop the livestock from heading back down the Three Rivers. This is a few decades later, of course. So this is now below where the ranger station was. It was also called Coral Valley, and that was named after those white tufa formations that we talked about. And this was where, of course, our smelter man got the crushed lime in order to feed it into the smelter. So they actually had a mine claim there because that was valuable ore. Again, it has economic value. Okay. So it was also, of course, called Mineral King. There are actually multiple settlements in Mineral King. There was the town of Beulah. There was the town of Harmonville. There was Mineral King proper, as well as several different camps. And it wasn't called Mineral King as a whole until 1877, when the post office was set up, and all of the other names kind of dwindled out of speaking. In fact, Harmonville was forgotten by most of the families. Just one family remembered it. It's now been revived, and you can see. Whoop, it's okay. It's okay, Laura. All right, so yeah, that's okay. I'm just going to show you the New England Tunnel and Smelting Company works right there, across from this wonderful corporate town flat. That was one of the things the New England Tunnel and Smelting Company and all corporations were into at the time, making things exactly square and aligned north to south, even if it didn't fit in with the topography. And so that's what they did in Mineral King too. So Mineral King had about 180 mine claim owners at the time that the New England Tunnel and Smelting Company was active. They were women and men, and some teenagers as well. Most of them were in farming, as you can see there, and about 30% of them were married. So I believe that most of the population in Mineral King actually consisted of their incredibly large families. When I researched their families, we had families with 16 kids at the time. So it was, you could imagine, a lot of families running around there, and all the boys were named King and the girls were named Minnie if they were born in Mineral King. And several of them were. They also had over 40 Chinese laborers that were brought in by the New England Tunnel and Smelting Company, and about 30 Euro-American laborers that were brought in as well. So 150 years, almost 150 years have passed. A lot has changed since then, right? What do you think has changed in the last 150 years?
Less animals, certain kind.
Yeah, definitely. That was one of the things the miners did, was actually wipe out most of the edible animals in
dig on the sheet. 75 of timber and 75 of fair wells.
Did you guys hear that? 75 bighorn sheep and timber and 75 farewell, which hopefully will be coming back, right? So in 1867, this is an 1867 map, and this is kind of where we are now. Three Rivers would be kind of recognize some of the names here: Swanson, Crowley. So this would be Three Rivers up in here. We've got what they call Korea Creek, which certainly isn't a creek now, right? Running down towards Visalia, which was down that way. And some of you might recognize some of these names if you're familiar with Three Rivers or Mineral King history. Some of you I know are actually descendants of some of the people that are named here. But this is a huge area, and this is like 160 acres. And actually that's township, yeah, 18. So it was very sparsely populated by farmers and ranchers in 1867. But that was to change very quickly. Between 1870 and 1880, the population increased 150%. So it went up from 4,500 people in the entire county. Can you imagine Laile County with that few people? Up to 11,000 in 10 years. So it probably took a lot of adjustment to accommodate that huge influx of people, right? And a lot of those people, because of the mining, actually came from other countries. So there was a huge culture shift in the area as a result of the mining. Now we have what, 480,000 somebody, you can probably tell us, right? People into Laile County.
465,000.
465,000 people living in Laile County. So the population has definitely changed. Politics maybe haven't changed all that much. When the mining rush started, it was only 10 years after the Civil War had ended, and Tulare County was really sharply divided still. And perhaps no more so than in Mineral King, where we had, can you see? I'm so sorry. Where we had Christian Democrats with profound Confederate sympathies who were rubbing shoulders with spiritualist Republicans. It probably didn't help that in the 1876 elections, Sam Sheldon, the Democrat, won the popular vote, but he did not win the electoral vote. And I was going through the headlines of the articles. A lot of them we could have just transferred to 2020 after the elections. None of us would have noticed. It was all pretty much the same. Another issue was that in 1873, the first Great Depression started. A lot of people I didn't know before I studied this, that there were two Great Depressions. We had to rename this one the Long Depression after the Second Great Depression. It was a process of experimentation to determine what would work. And they were actually ever given the chance in Mineral King to determine that. But yeah, or it was possible. Would they ever have been able to figure out how to get it out? Was there enough of it? Did the cost of extracting it outweigh that $50 per ton? Was that too excessive? That's a completely different matter altogether, right? But the ore did have possible. It was theoretically possible to extract valuable silver from it. Theoretically. Okay, so our smelter man, this is an expert that the New England Tunnel and Smelting Company hired to extract the silver from it. So was he qualified? So for almost as long as I've been alive, we have thought that the smelter man is Horace Porter Bivens. And it's not too much of a surprise. All of the historic evidence, and this is material that was actually written by the miners at the time, newspaper articles. His name is spelled as Bivens, Bevens, Blevins, and Livens. And so the historian picked the closest name that corresponded to someone who lived vaguely in the area, which turned out to be someone in Solano County, Horace Porter Bivens, and he really struggled with his last name. Poor guy. Even on his death certificate, they wrote Bivens and then Bevins. So let's see, somewhere down here you'll see they put down as his job that he was a farmer. So he was in agriculture. He was a farmer. He was born in Buffalo, New York, in 1836. He was the youngest son. The family had a lot of kids, and they were hotel keepers. And at some point, they decided to abandon the hotel industry and move to Illinois and get into farming. And so he had to, 10 years of age, to learn farming. But he met someone there, a boy the same age, who was called Amos. They became fast friends, and in 1859, at the age of 23, the two of them decided to escape farming. They said that they were working without remuneration for their parents and not getting paid, and so they wanted money. So they went to California in 1859 to try to make some money in the gold fields. They tried for an amazing 2 years. 1859 was not a good time to be mining for gold in California. And they decided that they were not going to be successful, so they squatted in on some farmland in Solano County, 160 acres, and the two of them became farmers together. And they were absolutely inseparable for their entire life. They were devoted to each other. But there was 1 year when Horace left Amos. That was 1876. He was said to have gone to Redwood Country. And that, of course, was the year that the New England Tunnel and Smelting Company hired its smelter man. So what do you think? You think Horace could have been our smelter man? Yeah?
Talking the talk, you can do anything.
Talking the talk, yeah. So do you think he was qualified?
No,
No?
absolutely
What
not.
about the rest of you? Well, Orlando felt he was. In his memoirs, he said he felt he was extremely qualified. He was the man to do the job, and if he had, been given a chance, he would have done it. But yeah, based off of his bio, he probably didn't have the qualifications for it, right? But this is just, we had no proof. Nothing was written, right, indicating that this was our smelter man. We only had his last name written like 6 different ways, right? So I'm still not trusting that he's our smelter man. I want to look a little bit further. And so the next thing we're going to do is look at our water jacket, which you guys are going to get to see very soon. So on the right, so these are rivets. And on the right, this is a rivet on our water jacket, the star of our show. This is the rivet on another piece of industrial equipment, which is still in Mineral King. It's a mining piece. And you can see the difference here. What do you see? Here's our water jacket. Here's the other one. What's the difference?
One's symmetrical.
Yeah, this one's definitely, of course, it's, yeah, this one's pretty rough, right? And if it were, if I had a better projector, you'd be able to see hammer marks here. Here you don't see hammer marks. Instead, you see this telltale line here. So in the 1870s, when they were putting their rivets into the metal sheeting, they used something called a snap tool. So instead of hitting the rivet head directly with a hammer, they hit a snap tool. It was kind of, it was cylindrical. And so you ended up with these very consistently shaped, kind of nice, pretty rivets. It would actually last longer, right? So that was the 1870s. But ours, our water jacket out there, you see it looks like it was professionally cut. There are features on it that tell us that it was one of many that were made. And yet, a hammer was used directly on the rivet. This was something that just didn't happen in the 1870s. That was an 1860s feature. So I became kind of suspicious. All of the documentation we have from Orlando said that our smelter was built new for the New England Tunnel and Smelting Company. But I'm beginning to have my suspicions. Okay. Then we look at the rivets more closely. Okay, so I love rivets. There's actually a guy who wrote a dissertation on the rivets, and he's one of my heroes. And here's the shank, and the shank, of course, would have extended down. Here's the shank here. This is where they would have hammered the shank in to make what they call a field head, which is what we were just looking at before. And so if you look at the ratio of the height of the cone to the diameter of the shank, that tells us its age too. And it tells me that our rivets were made before 1869. So of course they could have been made earlier, they could have used old rivets, right? But right now we have two pieces of evidence that kind of point to the notion that maybe this wasn't built in 1876, right? All right, let's go to the next one. So this is the start of the show. This is the water jacket component of the smelter. And it has some clues for us as well. These are called hand holes, and they were actually used in the manufacturing process. So in order to get, to hold up the rivet while you're hammering it, you have to be able to get inside, right? And this is two concentric cylinders that are sealed. So the only way to hold up the rivets inside is to stick your hand in through the hand holes. But it's a water jacket, which meant they were going to be circulating water in here. So they ended up sealing it with plates and these claws. And so in the 1860s, they were at the top. But quickly the miners learned that these hand holes had another purpose, which was to clean all of the silt and everything out from the interior of the water jacket. And so they moved them down to the bottom. So this also tells me that this was probably, that was done by 1874, 75. So that also tells me that this was probably built before 1870. Also, we've got these, remember I was talking about the tweers that our Orlando was using to blast air to the furnace to heat it up? Well, ours has 3 huge tweers. And by this time in the 1870s, they all had 5 to 10 small tweers. And there's more evidence as well, which I won't bore you with. But everything got the point. Everything's pointing to the notion that this was actually built in the late 1860s, right? Anybody disagree? Oh, so let's move on. So where does that take us? For me, I wanted to find water jackets that were similar to this one, because it was clear from looking at it, there are these instructional dots on how to put it together, just like IKEA furniture. And so there were multiple of these were made. So for me, it took me all over California, Nevada, Utah. Uh-oh, we're moving too fast.
No, it doesn't. Sorry about that. For some reason, it's not picking up the animation. It made you dizzy. It was good. It took you all across.
You're not supposed to click it. I've got it. Oh, you just click it.
Oh, got it.
There we go.
There you go.
Alright. So there I am in Utah. Oh, there we go. And I'm going to zip over to Colorado, Nevada, down to the Ridgecrest area, and back to 3 Rivers. And my search was absolutely fruitless. I spoke to every mining district that I could find, every historical archaeologist, and nothing. So I decided to go back further east, where I found what I was looking for, which was the very first water jacket smelters. They were made on the East Coast for copper. Yeah, not silver, but for copper. So they were the right size, they were the right shape, the wrong ore, right? Or were they? So I looked more at the New England Tunnel and Smelting Company. All of those people that they brought in were for the most part copper miners and copper experts from Antioch. All of the mining claims that they were acquiring were copper mining claims. And the New England Tunnel, that tunnel part of the name, New England Tunnel and Smelting Company, it intersected only copper claims. So that company actually come in to smelt copper. And our water jacket was never intended to smelt galena. So this is a photo of some of the copper ore that we have in Mineral King. Okay, so we still haven't figured out who our smelter man is, right? But at this point, I just suddenly, this light bulb went off. It should have occurred to me earlier. But at some point along the way, I had read about a smelter man who had brought 2 water jacket smelters from Pennsylvania to Eureka, Nevada. And his name was Washington Jackson Bevan. So he was, so you're going to learn all about him in there. But that's not really good enough proof, right? His smelters, when he brought them to Eureka, they had galena there as well, and they completely failed. He was a trunk maker, so he had no prior experience in smelting there either. You know, he tried and failed in Eureka, Nevada. So how could we find out if this is our guy? Let's go to the next one, Laura. So here we have Horace Porter Bivens, and here we have Washington Jackson Bevan. Do we have a vote at this point? Who's for Horace? No one's for Horace? Okay, everybody's for Washington? Yeah. But we still have no proof, right? So, I mean, we can't just go out and say it was Washington Jackson Bevan. So I turned back to those 3 1,000-page volumes of Mineral King Mining District records. And yeah, so I called my mom, who's back there, and I was just like jumping up and down. So we had Washington Jackson Bevan, and this was 1876, perfect time, right? There's no Horace Porter Bivens in the documentation. He signed it with Patty Thurman, one of our female miners. She was the wife of this one of the saloon keepers. So we've got it, right? So when you go into the exhibit, it'll tell you all about Washington Jackson Bevan. But was he qualified? Would you want him smelting mirror ore? Maybe. Maybe better than smelting it yourself, right?
Yeah.
So after Mineral King, you went up to Yosemite where you can meet him again. He co-founded the Tioga Mining District, which is also preserved. And it's a really fun, historic hiking destination. So you can see him here, and you can see him in Yosemite. All right, so we've got our final question then. Could the smelter have worked? We know that it was meant for copper. We know that it was meant for copper, right? But it has a lot of features, and some of those features that I told you that were 1860s features, not 1870 features, were definitely an issue. So the 4 large tweezers, so this is, I've sliced it through the center and drawn it sliced out through the center. So you're kind of, looking deep inside of it. So we've got these 3 tweezers. They would have, so much heat would have gone into the water jacket that instead of the ore melting here where it was supposed to, it would have melted up in the stack. And that meant that a lot of it would have vaporized, that silver and lead would have vaporized, and it would have escaped through the stack here, the chimney. Other issues with it, I think that was kind of the primary one. It would have been too hot. It would have caused more of the concretions, more of the freezing. The tuyeres, as well as the slag and the bullion spouts and outlets, would have concreted and completely blocked up. So it would have been completely unusable as a galena smelter, which it proved to be both in Mineral King and in Eureka. That didn't stop the miners from trying. This is a photo from probably somewhere between 1890 and 1900. There's our water jacket right there. We no longer have the structure in place, but we still have the slate stack here. And so it was still used. They tried to use it for quite some time because if other things have changed in the last 150 years, one thing hasn't changed, which is that we still nurture our hopes and our dreams. So what do you think? It's your turn. Do you have any questions? Do you have any thoughts? Are there any other questions that you all would ask in trying to solve the mystery of determine if the New England Tunnel and Smelting Company is actually legit?
How prevalent was copper?
It's very prevalent. So on the east side, almost all of the veins lower down were copper veins. That area was more hydrothermal, so it was more volcanic, and so there were different minerals and a different sort of mineralization that took place there. And so most of the galena was on the west side of the valley. And of course, the miners had gone there earlier. They were the prime of 1873. Maybe Newsville hadn't even reached this area. I don't know. But they were really focused on the silver and on the galena, and so that's what they stockpiled. The New England Tunnel and Smelting Company was trying to access all of that copper with a tunnel that was going to be about 2,000 feet deep. So they were focused on that rather than digging for silver. So they made use of all of the silver ore that had been stockpiled by the miners.
I'm curious still why the thieving and swindling part, were they telling people that their ore would give them a lot of silver or something? Because so far it doesn't seem like they're doing anything wrong except for they don't know what they're doing.
So yeah, right? It may be that they're more inept rather than swindlers, right? They were, saying that the ore was worth $500 a ton, which was pretty normal. That's where Mark Twain's, the mine is a hole in the ground with a ladder on top comes from. But in the exhibit, you'll be able to explore that question a bit further. But yeah, definitely agree. Some ineptness is definitely involved.
Aside from that one silver bar, who owned the Empire Mine?
Fallon.
Yeah, he had that one silver bar. I've never ever heard of any other silver that ever came out of, physical silver. that came
Yeah.
out of the mine.
So after the New England Tunnel and Smelting Company left, some of the miners hooked up bellows. They no longer had their nice blower, so they hooked up bellows to their 3 tweers. You would have to have 3 people there pumping the bellows, right? And they actually ran. So slag is what's left over. The slag is the material that floats to the top, and the silver and the lead sink down because they're heavier, right? And so anything, slag was just dumped into the river. And so they collected that slag and ran it through the smelter again. And they believed that they ended up with silver bars. So yeah, so they're, and then in addition to that, they came up with their own way of smelting, which was the frying pan method, which they used bellows and a blacksmith's tweeting in order to heat it up. And once again, there's evidence of that in places in Mineral King. Another bit of evidence for you to consider, we have mineralogical reports. Mineralogists used to go to Mineral King every year or so and assess the value of the mines and how it was doing, and they would write up a report for Congress. And so it tells how many tons of ore are in various different locations in Mineral King, and they're no longer there. Yeah. There's no longer the piles of ore on the site of the New England Tunnel and Smelting Company either. So we can conjecture about that. But yeah, so there is evidence that people did, for a short time, continue to process the ore in a, and of course, right after this, some more corporations came in. But when it was all done, people did continue processing the ore. But nobody was able to come up with anything that was commercially viable. And again, we don't know how much was there, and if it would ever, in any circumstance, be commercially viable, given the challenges. Any other questions? Yeah.
Were any of these operations state or federally funded? Because over-exaggerating the value of the ore could potentially get more state and federal funding for having a lesser value ore. Otherwise, I just see no capital gain of being like, oh yeah, $500 $1 a ton or whatever the
Yeah.
value was, and then coming
Yeah.
out with crappy products.
So I love that, question. So some of the leaders of the New England Tunnel and Smelting Company were at the same time involved with the Emma mine scandal. One of the favorite things to do at the time was to get funding from investors in England. And that might have been one of the reasons why they stuck England in the name. And so George Stewart, who was a senator from Nevada, so he was a federal senator, he was one of the trustees and top people in the New England Tunnel and Smelting Company. So he had been, with other people, pushing the Emma mine as a great investment, and he was at that time being accused of having misrepresented the value of the mine and the ore at the time. And it went all the way up to the vice president and I think it was the Secretary of State and the ambassador to England. They were all implicated. And after that, there was a push to have regulations to help prevent that kind of fraud from happening. But it continued, hence Mark Twain's quote. Yes?
So the equipment that was brought in was compatible for copper mining, and people were from independent. The other miners were there for silver. And so, but the smelting and tunnel company never went after the copper. They just did smelting for the other mines. How did the copper work into this? They just abandoned it?
Yeah, they just abandoned it. So they were, one thing about a corporation is that you have to show a return on investment pretty quickly. And so that's why they went ahead and started working with the Galena ore that was already readily available. They ended up going into bankruptcy, and there were lawsuits against them by vegetation. And when I saw it, I thought, oh, how can I have missed this for all these years? And I don't know when it collapsed. It did go in at least, according to the mineralogical records, at least 900 feet into the mountainside, and I have no record of when it collapsed. And when I've asked our older people, they have no memory of its location either. So it probably collapsed in the 1920s. In the 1920s, the Forest Service was purposely collapsing or destroying any kinds of adits that it thought was dangerous. So it could have happened in that time. It could have just collapsed naturally as well. But I can tell you guys have walked by it.
That's all you can say.
Well, you can say, you can't go in it anyway, so. Yes, Lisa?
I think we're good.
We're good. Thank you, you all. You're a great audience. Thank you so much. And now you get to be excited.